Hi, hello, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny and I am a Canadian knitter living in the beautiful northeast of England, and I have some knitting to talk to you about today. I'm so excited. I feel like it's been a really long time since I've filmed one of these kind of regular knitting updates, and my knitting's really been filling me up and I'm excited to share it with you. I'm not exactly sure how much knitting I'm going to share with you today, and the kind of one reason for that is it's been quite a while since I've filmed one of these and I have quite a bit to share, but I'm also working on pacing. Just for my health, I'm working on being more cognizant of my capacity. I'm conscious I haven't had a great last 2 weeks, so I might have less capacity today than I have on some of the previous afternoons that I've filmed. But just going forward, I'm going to try to just pace myself and be conscious and maybe talk about less than I planned on a given day. So you don't really need to know that, but I guess, I'm saying it for me, but I'm also saying it in case, if you were to go to my Ravelry page, you might see that I've finished a few more things than I am even planning to talk to you about today, and that will be the reason why. I'm planning to spread things out a bit so that I can film in slightly shorter bursts rather than doing big episodes just when I'm feeling up to doing them. So that's kind of the plan. I hope that's okay. I am really, really excited about the knitting that any of the knitting that I'm going to get to today because it's been really, really good. And let's start with some socks. Okay. I hope the lighting's okay. I did want to turn on another light, but there is a cat on my lap, so the lighting is just going to be what it is. So the first item that I have to show you is covered in cat hair. But this is maybe the most successful thing I've ever knit. Not in terms of like the process being without issues. I did have some issues I'll talk to you about. Not in terms of, it being definitely not in terms of it being the most exciting thing I've ever knit, but in terms of like use. I have worn these almost every day since I finished them. So what I want to show you first are my Tuffy boot socks. And I'm sorry, they are covered in cat hair, but these are my Tuffy boot socks, which is a pattern by Kate Atherley, who I just trust implicitly. I think Kate Atherley is fabulous. And Tuffy boot socks, and these are knit out of, they're called the Tuffy boot socks because they call for Briggs & Little Tuffy yarn. I have knit these out of just regular Briggs & Little Heritage. The difference is that Briggs & Little Tuffy has some nylon, Heritage does not, but I'm not too hard on my socks, and, well, not too hard on my socks right now. I'm not walking anywhere ever, and these are really like sitting around keeping my feet warm socks for me. So if you're not familiar with Briggs & Little Heritage or Briggs & Little Tuffy, this will not have told you very much, but these are knit at an Aran weight. The gauge is quite small. I think Kate Atherley calls for 20, like quite tight. I think Kate Atherley calls for 20 stitches for 10 centimeters or 4 inches. I knit them even a little bit tighter. I think I'm at 22 stitches for 10 centimeters or 4 inches. So they're quite dense, but oh my god, I love them. So I knit these. Oh, and it's a free pattern. That's what I was hesitating about before. It's a free pattern. That's what I meant to say. And just a really great one. I knit these because I have been wearing my other hand knit socks. I haven't knit that many socks. If you have been with me before, you will know that I am still very much a beginner sock knitter, and I love my hand knit socks. But sitting around in the evenings, or even during the day, if I'm honest, we don't keep our house very warm, and especially sitting still, my extremities get so cold. And even in my lovely, 100% wool socks, my toes were getting really cold. And I love these. These have basically solved that. If it's really cold, I can still get a bit chilled, but for the most part, I'm pretty toasty in these, and that is why they are one of my favorite knits. I wear them all the time. they wear like iron. Like they show no use, even though I have been wearing them so much. They're not even felting yet, which makes sense because I haven't been walking around in them a lot. You know, I'm not sweating into them because I'm sitting still. But they're just so useful. And I've knit them in the color Evergreen, which I don't know if that will show up well. They're looking very blue to me, what I can see here, so we'll have to see how it comes out on the computer later. But it is a blue, but it's like a blue with like turquoise in it and some red. It's just gorgeous. Knitting these really made me want to buy a sweater's quantity of this and knit up a sweater, but I'm trying to get through some stash first. So I'm not going to buy that immediately, but oh my gosh, would I love to have a sweater in this evergreen color. So I don't have a ton to say about the pattern. It's fairly straightforward. It's a regular gusset, heel flap and gusset. Heel is what was the words I was looking for. So a fairly basic construction, but just really good. They fit me really well. I have learned. I'm still very much getting used to learning how I want my hand knit socks to fit. I feel like these I could have gone down 2 stitches probably. I knit these between the smallest size and the next size up, which were 36 and 40 stitches. I knit them at 38, which I thought would fit me a bit better. And I think I probably could go down to the 36, but then they would be quite tight. And because these are a non-superwash wool, I'm conscious that they could felt and then they might get smaller. So I don't know. I'm still learning kind of what works for me. I think a next pair I would knit smaller and just see how that goes. But yeah, I other than figuring out the exact stitch count that works best for me in this pattern, I can see myself knitting lots and lots of these for myself. And I will, in fact, be knitting more soon because I'm going to knit a pair for my father. I bought, so this is Tuffy, Briggs & Little Tuffy, which, what is the, oh, so it's 80% wool and 20% nylon. Let's see if I can show you that. My dad is much harder on his socks than I am, much harder on everything than I am, and since, you know, he lives in Canada and I do not, I will not be around to darn any socks for him. So I did want to get the yarn with the nylon for him, and these were going to be a surprise because my dad, having been one of those people who runs really warm, quite warm-blooded his whole adult life, has in the last few years started to find his extremities getting cold, and oh my goodness, gosh, is he good at complaining about it, which my mom and I just kind of laugh at because, you know, we've lived with that our whole lives. But bless him. So I thought that a pair of good thick socks would be a really welcome gift. I wish I'd knit them before. It sounds like this winter, and certainly in Montreal, it's been a really cold winter, deep cold that has lasted longer than usual. So that would have been a good gift to have gotten him a bit earlier. But anyway, so this was going to be a surprise, and then I thought, as I was knitting mine and figuring out the size and things like that, I thought, you know, it would be fun for it to be a surprise, but really, I'd rather them fit him really well and be a really useful sock than be a surprise that maybe doesn't fit quite as well because I'm basing it off generalized measurements instead of, like, the real measurements of my dad's feet. And I was thinking about that in part because I do feel like there's slightly, I don't know if this is true. I'm tempted to say that there's less margin for error because the gauge is so big than a sock knit on sock weight yarn. And I think to a certain extent that is true. And the stretch is slightly different. Anyways, I mean, I would still be the reason I'm hesitating is I would still be basing it off kind of like generalized measurements of X size feet that I would find on the internet according, and you know, apply according to what the pattern says. So I don't know if it makes that big a difference, but either way, I guess I was starting to think it would be better for them to fit him really closely and really well, and for that it would be better to get specific measurements of my dad's feet. My dad and I both have quite high arches, so for example, I have learned that I now make the heel flap quite a bit longer than patterns call for, and that accommodates my high arch and makes them more comfortable for me, makes them fit a little bit better. So, you know, I want to do that for him, and so I want to know how long his heel is and stuff like that. So, not going to be a surprise anymore. And I showed him the yarn, and I showed him my socks, and he went, "Aw, how come I get a boring gray and you get that fun color?" So I'm going to be knitting lots of these socks, because I think what I'm going to do, I asked for measurements. My mom helped measure my dad's feet with a fabric ruler, and I'm going to make him this pair ahead of their next visit. But I have also purchased a more fun color in the Tuffy yarn. I thought this would be a good neutral, but I've also purchased a more fun color, which I let him pick in the Tuffy yarn, and I have sent that to the house. So I'm going to hand him this pair of socks. He's going to hand me the other yarn when they visit, and then he can let me know how they fit, if he wants a little bit more room somewhere, a little bit less room somewhere. So I think that's where we've settled. But I thought that was quite funny that I hadn't really thought of it. The yarn shop that I bought the yarn for these two at the same time, and the yarn shop that I bought it from online in Canada didn't have a ton of stock of the Tuffy, and so I went for this because the other colors were definitely not dad colors. I remember they had like a rusty color, which is a lovely color, but not one that dad or I really wears. So anyways, now he's going to get 2 pairs of socks, which I think works out pretty well. And he was really, really excited about the idea of good, thick socks, so that made me quite happy. My dad said when the yarn arrived, he was like, "Oh, this is the yarn for my socks." So I'm really pleased about that. Other things to say about this before we move on. As I said, I don't really have much to say about the pattern, because it was just really, really a really solid Kate Atherley pattern, trusted implicitly. But with this pair of socks and with a work in progress that I'm hoping to show you, I what's the best way to say this? I continue to have some issues with my gauge when my hands are inflamed. And that is mainly, obviously when my inflammation is really bad, I'm not knitting. But there are days when I have kind of minimal inflammation and the pain isn't too bad, and I still want to knit while I can, and I find that my tension then tends to be a bit looser. Or I'm conscious that my tension is apt to be a bit looser when I have some inflammation, so then I really tighten up and my gauge gets tighter, but also that does really hurt my hands. Tightening up more than normal for me, more than what is normal for me, definitely causes pain. So I spent part of January experimenting with trying to kind of teach myself to have a looser gauge generally, which would then accommodate, like, you know, that change when my hands are inflamed. And I've got to say, it did not work. That's not really how gauge or inflammation work. My theory was, you know, like, I'll just knit looser all the time, and then when I'm inflamed, the gauge will just match and it'll work. And that's not how it worked. I was, you know, trying to teach myself to be looser, and I was learning that I think I'm quite good actually at picking up a piece that I'm working on and matching the gauge of that piece, of, you know, like matching, I don't know, something about like slipping into the holes that already exist. There's like an established gauge and I can continue going in with that. That's not too bad, so that was a relief. But as I was trying to loosen up my gauge, my tension from one project to another, wildly different. I'm going to talk a little bit later. My tension from gauge swatch to knitted item, wildly different. And I just had a hard time being consistent. With these socks, I cast on the first one while I was quite inflamed. I probably shouldn't have been knitting. And so part of the reason I'm talking about this in regard to this project is that, it's this one, is that I started off with the cuff was way too loose. Like I was trying to have a looser gauge and I went way too loose because I also had inflammation at the time, and I didn't really notice, like it definitely, and then the beginning of the stock, so the ribbing was too loose and the beginning of the stockinette stitch was also too loose, and I knit the rest of the sock. I was no inflammation, so that was fine. But then when I started the second sock, I was like, oh my god, these don't, like they didn't match at all. Like one of the socks was, like a full centimeter sticking out when I held them next to each other, and that's with it doubled up, so it's like an extra 2 centimeters around, which, I mean, I think lots when the socks are on your feet you don't feel huge, minor differences, but 2 centimeters difference, I was going to feel that and it was going to drive me crazy. So what I ended up doing was, with this sock, I mean, I don't think you can tell, which is very good, but I did end up cutting off the top of the sock and picking up the stitches and knitting in the other direction. And I had never done that before. I've never picked up and knit kind of against the existing grain, and I was a bit nervous about it, but also pretty low stakes with a sock, so I figured if it was really visibly evident, it wouldn't matter. And instead, I think it's really not very evident at all. In fact, each time I look at them, I kind of have to have a minute of, now which one's the one that goes in the wrong direction? And it's this one, but I do have to think about it. So, and I was worried that the cast on and the cast off would have different tensions, and they do slightly. I think my cast on is slightly tighter than my cast off. I used my kind of favorite stretchy cast on and bind off in each case, which is the German twisted cast on and the sewn Italian bind off, respectively. And my bind off is a little bit looser, but that really doesn't bother me. So that was kind of interesting. It was a good lesson for me that, I think probably it would be possible to make my tension looser over time, but I think trying to make it happen quickly and all at once is not really how tension generally works. There is, an established muscle memory that is what is normal for me and what works for me and what my hands are used to and what I can do without thinking. And when I'm trying to think too hard about loosening my tension, I'm not even across different items. But also I think no matter, even if I were to manage to develop a looser tension, then when I am experiencing inflammation, I would be looser still. I think that's just the nature of that. So, worked out okay. And actually it was kind of quite fun to cut the sock and knit it upwards. I did think at the time that it would have been a good, a fun thing to film and share with you, but I wasn't feeling great, so I didn't do that. But if I ever have to do something like that again, maybe I'll film it a bit. There's something kind of fascinating about there's something kind of fascinating about fixing mistakes, but also watching other people fix mistakes. I was just watching a Fruity knitting episode where they were doing something like that, and I really like that kind of stuff. So anyways, I've babbled on about this, but part of that is just because I wanted to talk to you about the tension issues, which I will come back to later. But yes, the big takeaway is I love these socks. I love the pattern. I love socks made out of good, thick, woolly, this is a woolen spun, so like a really warm, rustic yarn. Maybe my most successful knit ever. Certainly the knit that upon completion I have worn the most consecutive, like I wear them all, like, I will have to stop to wash them eventually, but, other than that, I'm just wearing them. So really, really good. So the second item that I want to show you is also a finished object, and this one I'm so excited about. This is my Tsinnia shawl, by Jenny Ansah, who is a Finnish designer. And this is a pattern that was published in Lane magazine, not Lane, Lina magazine. I have to unlearn the French. In Lina magazine in the summer of 2024. And I saw the pattern on Ravelry when it first came out and completely fell in love with it. And kind of thought, oh, you know, I'm not too excited about anything else in that issue of the magazine. I'll wait a year's time until the designers get the rights back to the patterns and release them digitally. And I was a bit sad, but I kind of thought, oh, you know, that's fine. There's no rush. And then in the course of waiting for that time to elapse, I, as you know, if you've been with me before, had quite a health crash and was not knitting. And I basically stopped looking at Ravelry for a really long time because, you know, it was sad to look at Ravelry without being able to knit. So I didn't look for a long time. And then when I kind of started to be able to knit again in October, November, I went to go find this pattern and it was still not released as a digital copy. So I even kind of, you know, what feels like a big moment for me, I even commented on the pattern page and said, oh, you know, if you were going to release this as a digital pattern, I would love to knit it. And I don't think that she's seen the message, which is absolutely fair enough. But I just love the pattern so much. So I actually did treat myself. I kind of thought, you know, life has been hard. And knitting is such a boon for me. And you know, the world has been hard and my health has been hard. 2025 was a rough year. So I did buy the issue of the magazine. So I can show you. I always forget, sorry, I have the page marked for the pattern itself. I always forget that the pattern and the pictures are actually separate. So I knitted in quite a similar color to the original. And I did find this on sale, so that was very nice as well. So I was quite pleased with that. And it was so much fun to knit. So it's in this lovely red color, and this is knit out of Merino d'Arles by Rosie Greenwool. And this is a really lovely wool. It's in the color, sorry, I should have said in the color piment, which means pepper. Right? Yes, piment means pepper, yes. And I quite like this yarn label. It's kind of like a little, you know, a little flap. And I'll just read you inside because I always love that kind of stuff, in case you love that kind of stuff as well. And it's got the transhumance word. This is one of those things where in the previous video I was talking to you about how I didn't know the word transhumance before, and it's in here as well. I'm seeing it everywhere. So I don't know how I missed it before, but anyways. So it says, Merino d'Arles. For centuries, shepherds have been guiding their flocks over hundreds of kilometers from southern France to the lush meadows of the Alps during the summer. This old tradition, called transhumance, was adopted in 1806 for the Merino d'Arles sheep and continues today. They are a crossbreed of old native sheep, with Merinos first imported from Spain by Louis XVI. We partner with small manufacturers in England to spin and dye the wool according to strict GOTS regulations, GOTS regulations, without harmful chemicals, with strict checks for residues, and under controlled and fair working conditions. This yarn has been developed in collaboration with designer Melanie Berg. So that was quite nice. I was not aware of this yarn before, but the shop that I purchased the issue of Lina from actually had a kit or a bundle, I guess, where you bought the Lina magazine with one 50-gram hank of the Merino d'Arles. It comes in 50-gram hanks as a kind of little deal, and you got a little bit off the yarn as well, buying the two together. So I thought that was really lovely. And the yardage for, I thought that was helpful as well, because the pattern calls for 220 meters, I think, and Yeah, so the pattern calls for 220 meters, but this only has 200 meters in it. And the woman who owned the shop said that she had paired these together because she knit the Tsinnia shawl out of this, and she still had like quite a bit of yarn left over. So there's clearly a bit of, like, they've put the designer or Lina, I'm not sure who would make the decision in the case of when it's published in the magazine, but someone has clearly made the decision to give a good margin of error for the yardage. So that was helpful. Helpful to know, and I would not, you know, if I had seen this yarn separately, I would not have bought it for that pattern because I would have thought there wouldn't be enough. But I actually had quite a bit left. I think mine has turned out, I think mine ended up being 3 or 4 inches shorter than the dimensions listed for the finished object, final dimensions in the pattern. I did go up a needle size, but I didn't swatch. And I never swatch for accessories. And I probably should have either swatched or gone up 2 needle sizes because it is a little bit smaller. But that's okay. I have not... I feel a little bit sheepish, I guess, sharing this item with you because I love it so much. I enjoyed knitting it so much. I do want to talk to you about that a little bit, but I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to wear this. I have been, you know, like, I think it's quite cute as a little, kind of like, almost like a little Boy Scout kerchief, which I quite like. I was a Girl Scout. I should stop calling it a Boy Scout kerchief and call it a Girl Scout kerchief. I do quite like it. It's such a bright red as well, so such a kind of snap of color, which I really like. I do feel like it's quite, it draws quite a bit of attention because it's so cute and it's little and quite fashionable and such a bright color. And I should get, yeah, I love it so much, I should get used to wearing it, but I'm not sure how much use I'm going to get out of this red one. It feels so cute. I don't know if I'm, like, you know. But I think this has actually been a good project for me in that it really was all about just like love of the pattern, and I really enjoyed knitting it. And definitely one of the things that I was thinking as well, and I'll show you this side as well, I kind of wish, and I knew this before I bought it, but I kind of wish that there was, you know, like, there isn't enough room, that's why it's not there, but I kind of wish there was another flower here. Jenny Ansah writes in the write-up, the Tsinnia flower is the zinnia in English. And I kind of wish that there was another one here. I would really like to experiment with knitting this bigger. I think this would look really great in so many colors, and I definitely am planning to just kind of, it's all charted, and I'm definitely planning on playing with the charts and extending the charts so that I can knit some different sizes of this. I think that will be really fun. So I don't know, maybe this is a bit too fashionable for me and I won't get a ton of use out of this first version. Or maybe I'll find a friend who is more fashionable than me who would get more wear out of it. But either way, it was really fun to knit, and I think I will enjoy knitting further iterations. I think if it was a bigger version, I can see myself wearing it more with summer dresses and stuff like that. I'm thinking of knitting one in the fern green color of Briggs & Little. I would really like that. But anyways, things I wanted to tell you about knitting this. Yes, so I really, really enjoyed knitting this. It was a bit more textured than I expected because all the way through this is, I mean, I should have figured that out. I just didn't really think about it. I was thinking about the flowers in particular and just assumed this was normal rib, but it's half twisted rib all the way through. So on the other side, it looks like normal rib. And the seed stitch, which is so fun. But on this side, it is half twisted rib, which is just a little bit of extra torque with the needle. So it was just a little bit tricky with my hands. Sometimes I had to knit this in smaller bursts than I was guessing, but that was okay. And I do love the way that you get all the different textures. So the twisted rib is so visually interesting. And then you've got the seed stitch in the flowers. Do that, and the baubles. And the baubles, I think, were one of my favorite parts. I know that baubles can be divisive. Some people really don't like baubles. I think I really like baubles, and I think I really like knitting baubles, which I did not expect. I was looking up tutorials. You know, I like the instructions were quite clear for how to knit baubles, but I have heard other people talk about really preferring some ways of knitting baubles over others. So I just went, you know, looked up some tutorials to see what the different ways were, and watched a couple of different tutorials and things like that. And I found a video by Andrea Mowry where she showed how she likes to knit baubles without having to turn her work by knitting. I want to say knitting backwards, because of course some people do knit in the knitting in the opposite direction to what I normally knit. So I normally knit from my right needle onto my left needle, and I mean, you know, it was 3 stitches at a time. So I don't want to say I know how to knit backwards, or I know how to knit in the reverse direction of what I usually do, but 3 stitches at a time I do, and I think that will be quite useful. I think I'm going to post this before I share the rest of my knitting plans for 2026, where I share some patterns that I don't have yarn for but that I'm really excited for. And there's a pattern in there that uses entrelac knitting, and that I have already talked about it in the past, but I will not upload it until after this. And I think for that pattern, knowing how to knit in the opposite direction would be really helpful as well. So that was quite fun to learn that skill. And it made the baubles really satisfying. Like, it was kind of, I looked forward every time there was a row with a bauble. I was like, oh, I get to do a bauble, or sometimes 2 baubles. No, always 2 baubles. They're never on their own. And that was really, really fun to like pass it back and forth from the needles. So I enjoyed that very much. I will link the Andrea Mowry tutorial below in case you're interested. But that was really fun. So I don't think I have much more to say about this. I followed the pattern exactly. I didn't make a single modification, I don't think. No, other than inadvertently knitting it a bit smaller and inadvertently knitting it off gauge. I didn't make a single modification of this, and it was just a really fun knit. So yeah, I will definitely be knitting some more because it was fun, and it used so little yardage. I didn't look up exactly how much yardage mine used to share with you, because I figure I'm off gauge, so it wouldn't necessarily be reproducible unless you also were to knit it at a smaller gauge. But I think it could be really useful for little odds and ends of, you know, fingering or sport weight yarns as well. So I didn't say, did I, that the pattern calls for fingering, and this is also fingering. But yeah, not much more to say about that. Just really fun and bright and flowers and baubles. I really, really like baubles, I guess. Yeah. Okay, so the third and I think probably final item that I will share with you today is a work in progress, and it is one that I talked about in that 2026 knitting plans, which every time I say 2026 knitting plans, I have a little tick. Calling it the 2026 knitting plans is just like a succinct and easily communicable way to talk about that, but I am very conscious that it may well take me 3 years or 4 years to knit through all of those garments. I'm not, you know, it will depend very much on my hands and how much I'm able to knit, but that was very ambitious. So we'll just have to see. But yes, so the sweater I want to talk to you about is the Caledonia. So this is a pattern by Sylvia Cherry, and it is for a sweater that is knit from the bottom up in pieces and then seamed together. Just dragged some wool over the cat's head and she is irritated at me. Yes. So this is knit up in yarn that I also showed you, and that is Blacker Yarns Tour, this gorgeous pink heathered yarn with all sorts of, the yarn was subtitled yarn from the West Country, and I think I neglected to mention that all those different sheep breeds and alpaca that went into this were all from the West Country, so a really local to a specific part of England wool, just gorgeous. I do have a full ball that I brought with me to show you so that I can show you the ball band again, but it's just out of reach, and I can't reach it with the cat on my lap, so I apologize for not having the ball band at hand. But this, I mean, this is just such a fun pattern. I don't have a lot to say about the pattern itself. I do have something to say about my knitting of it, but the pattern itself is just really great. I will say it starts with double twisted rib, and while I did not mind doing the single twisted rib on the Tsinnia shawl, I don't like double twisted rib. Oh my god, that was not fun. I was very ready for that to be over. It was the kind of, you know, like slight, not tediousness, but the slight, you know, extra step with the ribbing of passing the yarn backwards and forwards all the time, but it was also just a lot of twisting, a lot of torque. It was not the easiest thing on my hands. I did not love it, but I think that it does suit the pattern so well. And anyways, I was still gonna do it. It did occur to me that I could have just changed it to regular ribbing. I didn't want to do that. I wanted, you know, I like the way that it looks in the pattern. I think this pattern, I was reading through other people's Ravelry pages, and more than one person commented that it was a really thoughtful pattern, like a pattern with lots of thoughtful details and thought put into the writing of the pattern, and I agree. It's a very thoughtful pattern, and I don't want to change any of the details because they've really, you know, Sylvia Watts Cherry has clearly picked double twisted rib for a reason, and I agree with her. So that was not fun. The cable section, though, was so much fun. I found that very, very Moorish. In a very similar way, you know, I think I was talking about knitting this Hesper cardigan, the mosaic knitting. Like, I found that so Moorish. I finished that so quickly, and then it slowed down with the rest of the sweater. And I'm very much having the same situation with this, where this I knit so quickly. I had so much fun. You know, I just wanted to keep going and see the cables appear, and just, you know, so lovely. And now that I'm on to, I can't remember what this was called, but it's knits and purls next to each other, but a depth of 2 rows, so kind of going in this direction, it's 1 knit, 1 purl next to each other. Vertically, it's kind of knit, knit, purl, purl, knit, knit, purl, purl. Is that moss stitch? I feel like moss stitch has a different definition in North America than it does here. I get a bit twisted around with that kind of stuff, but I'm definitely finding that less exciting to knit. I have slowed down a little bit, but it's just gorgeous. So the more exciting bit of this is that I actually have a whole other section, but this is not because I'm that far through the pattern. I don't know if you'll be able to tell, but this is much bigger than the other piece I just showed you. And actually both pieces, like this one, I keep looking at it and thinking, is this going to be big enough? This is looking small. And I don't know if you will be having that experience. Sometimes when I watch people and other YouTubers talk about things that they've knit in pieces, when they hold things up, I'm like, that's looking small. But then it always fits in the end. So I think there's something about I'm just not used to seeing. I'm much more used to knitting things in the round and seeing things knit in the round. So that looks very small. This is one of the other strong examples of when I was trying to play with my gauge and make my knitting looser. And I knit what I thought was quite a loose gauge swatch for this. And then I was knitting this, and it took me a while to realize that this is actually way bigger than my gauge swatch was. And now I haven't blocked this, but I always measure my gauge swatch before I block it and after I block it, just to kind of reassure myself, and then, you know, if I'm ever worried about something, I can go back and check. But it also just, I like to have both sets of numbers, because then I get a sense of how much it expands, and, you know, just useful for math if I want to reassure myself along the way about how something is going to fit exactly, a sleeve or something like that. So I do have the stitch count from my loose gauge swatch before I blocked it, and this is wildly different. Wildly different. So I do need to pull this out, but I have learned about myself. I don't know if anyone else has this, or if you find this, I guess, but I have learned that I find it a bit discouraging sometimes to, when I realize something is not working, pull it out right away and start re-knitting from scratch. For some reason, just, you know, some little trick myself trick, I find it easier to leave the kind of thing I want to frog to the side, as long as I have enough yarn, and start from fresh, and then once I get to kind of the same stage, frog it. So I am getting to a point now where I'm gonna frog this. But I wanted to show you, well, I wanted to show you first kind of that I've made a mistake with the knitting. I've made a mistake with the gauge, but I also wanted to reach kind of a similar stage, and then now I'm not emotionally attached to this at all, so I won't have any feelings about frogging this. I did want to show you as well, though, this pattern really is so thoughtful, and Sylvia Watch Cherry really emphasizes that you want to slip the first stitch of each row and knit the final stitch of each row. And when I got to the decreases, I thought, like, should I still be doing that? Maybe I shouldn't still be doing that. So I stopped doing that, and I knit the first stitch. And it looked terrible. It was really gappy. There were kind of holes at each of the points where the decreases happen, and I really didn't like it, so I pulled back and I redid it, going back to her advice: slip the first stitch, knit the final stitch, and you get these lovely, smooth decreases. So I really do, I honestly keep thinking about people saying that there were lots of thoughtful details and lots of thought had been put into the pattern. I am very much finding that to be the case. And I think in that way, this was a really good pattern. I didn't say, but I picked this pattern partially because it's knit flat and seamed, and I've never done that for a full garment with sleeves. I've done that for a vest for my husband, but nothing with sleeves before, nothing this complicated before. And I think that this pattern is a really good choice for that if you're interested in knitting something flat and seamed. I know that lots of people are not, but if you are interested in knitting something flat and seamed and have not done that before, I think this is a good one to start with because it's really well and thoughtfully written. So do I have much else to say? I definitely need to restart this. I am finding I'm a bit slow with this texture. I knew I would be. It's just that a tiny little bit tedious in the way that ribbing is, just because you're always, yes, we're turning around, always having to move the yarn between the needles to go from knits to purls. So I've slowed down a little bit. I've also discovered that for me and my hands, being an increasingly less monogamous and increasingly polygamous, I guess, knitter is slightly better. So especially while I was doing the cables, I was conscious, or actually I sped through this. I should say that it's more with this because the Tsinnia I had, you know, the twisted rib and the bobbles and things like that. I'm learning that it's good for me to have something with just stockinette and something that's a bit more complicated on the go at the same time, so that then if my hands are tired I can switch to just the stockinette. I think because of my tension issues, I've also got a shawl on the go that I was actually knitting on during that knit and chat video, so you have seen it if you watched that, but that I will not talk to you about today. And I think having a shawl, like some easy stockinette, something a bit more complicated, if I want to have something a bit more complicated, and a shawl or something like that where my gauge doesn't matter too much is a good kind of range of things to have on my needles, because then I can work on the shawl if my hands are a bit inflamed. I'm not super worried about gauge being totally consistent, and you know, like I just feel like it matters a bit less than something you're going to wrap around your neck, so it's nice to have a low anxiety if I want to push a knit a little bit, even when my hands are inflamed, I'll work on a shawl or something like that. Good to have something easy and stockinette that is a bit mindless if I'm feeling, you know, tired, have lots of brain fog, and, you know, it doesn't require too much thought and is easy on my hands in that there isn't a lot of cabling or, you know, not having to twist the needles or, you know, when you're cabling, like just pulling them around, the twisting, I feel like there's just a bit more weight behind that stitch too, that kind of thing. So I'm learning that for sure. And that is just slowing me down a bit with this slightly more complicated. I am definitely noticing, now that I'm working on more projects at the same time, concurrently, than I previously would. It's taking me longer to finish individual objects or make progress on individual objects, but I think it's making for a more positive and less stressful knitting experience in general, so I'm going to keep going with that. That's the plan for now. But yeah, I'm excited to wear this one, I think. And I think it's going to be a really good color. It'll be quite warm, but I think it's going to be a really good color for spring and summer. So I'm looking forward to getting some wear out of that even as the weather gets a little bit warmer. Okay, I think I'm going to stop myself there and leave it there. I feel like I've gotten into some good meat of knitting and I'm still feeling good. I'm going to stop while I'm ahead. But I've really enjoyed just talking through my knits with you and sharing some of those challenges and joys and, you know, discoveries. Very excited that I like knitting bobbles. Do you like bobbles or do you hate knitting bobbles? You know, I feel like there are strong feelings in the knitting community about bobbles. And I had never previously known what my feelings about it were, so it's good to know that. And yeah, thank you so much as always for being with me. And I hope you are keeping well as the world continues to be quite difficult. I hope that your knitting is bringing you comfort. And I will see you next time.